Hello, and welcome back everyone. Today we'll be covering an in-depth analysis of the Endless Defense. An enormous thanks to yuuna, who has taken his time to log, analyze, and offer feedback based on his results, and without him, this video would not be possible. First, let me explain the process that was used to get the data. yuuna used a program that works off video capture. By capturing and recording frames repeatedly, he was able to gather data on enemy health which could then be inputted on a graph, while remaining within the terms of service. Note that some outlier points may be intermittent glitches due to the means of capturing data this way. Distinguishing bosses and normal mobs can be done by the color of the text that is seen on the screen. These tests were repeated with different raw damage values, allowing us to see that the health pools were changing. This proved the manner in which the game normalizes this event for all players. We use this to continue testing for how the game adapts to number of players. To prove it adapts dynamically, theorize which skills would be more favorable for the event, determine if resonance gave any advantage, and the effect of combat rating. Through testing, we can confirm Endless Defense is a normalized game mode. Similar to Elder Rifts, combat rating, resonance, and base damage are all irrelevant. Enemy health points scale directly with your base damage to perfectly cancel out. If the 5k player hits the monster for 20k damage, or 20% of the total health, the 10k player also sees the boss lose 20% of its health, but the value will now be 160k out of 200k for that player. For the first test, paragon points were reset to remove health and damage nodes, while keeping all their points in place. The character lost damage and health, but combat rating and resonance remained unchanged. As a result, monster health decreased accordingly. The hit point difference was completely explainable by the ratio between damage. Now here's a simulated plot with health points multiplied. Notice how they match. For the second test, health nodes were restored, while still ignoring damage nodes, with the exception of 100 points in damage from the Vanquisher tree in order to enable all hit point nodes. Monster health points remained mostly the same as with Paragon fully reset, with a slight shift explainable by the small 100 damage in the Vanquisher tree. This suggests it scales purely off damage and not a mix of damage plus health like PvP combat rating. The exact same tests were done on a free-to-play character with completely different resonance and combat rating. Again, damage ratio completely accounted for the difference. At this point, we are unsure if substats like crit, armor penetration, potency, or resistance matter at all in this event. The reason we have no idea is because we haven't tested it yet. We're humans with real lives outside of the game, and this work is very time-consuming. However, we're more than willing to test it as we get more time. We're also unsure if enemy damage scales perfectly with your hit points to cancel each other out, but we assume it does based on other conclusions at this point. Again, multiplying this up makes them align, excluding some rounding errors since the game only shows a certain number of decimal places for health points. From here, we started testing with multiple players. Enemy health scales with the number of players up to a full group of 8 players. The scaling is done dynamically, immediately as players enter or leave the Endless Defense. Another player's combat rating, resonance, and damage will not affect the health pool you see on your screen. These values are shown differently to each individual player and based off of that player's damage and the number of players inside. The scaling is as follows: 1 player, 100%, 2 players, 100%, 3 players, 145%, 4 players, 190%, 5 players, 235%, 6 players, 280%, 7 players, 325%, and 8 players, 370%. It was interesting to note that the mob health is unchanged for 2 players. For the first multiplayer test, 2 players fought until the first boss spawned, and a 3rd player zoned in at that time. The boss's health immediately jumped up by 45%. For the second test, the beginning steps were repeated, with an ungeared player entering when the boss arrived. At this point, the boss's health increased by 45%, and when the player exited, the boss's health dropped back to its original value. For ease of consideration, we rounded the 45 increases to 50%, and found that for each additional player after the second, you will need equal contribution towards total DPS to match your previous pace. Now let's talk about some general concepts within Endless Defense. The fog will tick forward every 30 seconds. Typical pace is 1,000 points per minute. Most trash mobs give 10 points, but elites give some more. sometimes 25. Trash mobs spawn with some random hit point variance, around 30%. Bosses have no hit point variance at all, meaning each boss will have the same hit points if you keep all else equal in regards to base damage, number of allies, etc. Events seem to be aligned to a combination of score, which is also an approximate number of waves cleared, and time. Both need to pass a certain threshold. For example, the first boss seems to require 2700 plus score, and 3 minutes and 20 seconds elapsed. If you're keeping pace, both will generally be interchangeable, and as you fall behind, score becomes the better indicator for boss spawns. The game generally alternates between spawning waves of bosses and elites. Elites are the big enemies with special attacks like the poison puddle and the spinning axe of death that I think we all know by now. This is important because it means bosses and elites will never spawn together at once, but they could be in play at the same time if your score and time meet the threshold to spawn both types. Generally, bosses are tuned to spawn every 3,333 points, or 3 per 10,000 points, or 3 per 10 minutes, or 1 per 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Boss spawns can shift roughly 600 points as seen by the first boss being capable of spawning at 2,700 points. The hit points of all enemies increase gradually up to 35% between bosses. So what do we do with all this information? Well, for one, there will certainly be more videos about this aspect of the game in the future, and hopefully we can start to be more specific about which skills, builds, classes, etc. will work best. However, for now, we can tell you our best results came from choosing skills that buff our party and not just ourselves. Since everything is normalized, even the largest whale will have more impact with group buffs or debuffs that apply to all enemies. Also, noteworthy, red gems, well, they seem to have no impact at all. Whether you use tourmalines, rubies, both, or neither, doesn't matter, because the mob's health scales to your damage, and the mob's damage scales to your health. This is also interesting because we're yet to test armor, armor pen, potency, and resistance. So we're curious to see what will happen when we do. Again, many thanks to Yuuna for collaborating with me and having the willingness to share this data with the community. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.